Hello and welcome back to another video. Today it's going to be my second first impressions of Wildstar. Yeah, why am I doing a video so long after launch? Well, I ask you this, what happens if you make an MMO and then you completely cock up the launch? It's simple, you go free to play, and the people over at Carbine really do seem to have tried hard, with the free to play patch essentially being the game's largest update ever. They claim to have revamped many systems the players had problems with, and they've added a surprisingly fair cash shop. Not only is this a relaunch, but it's also a major redesign, at least from what they're saying. So today I'm going to give you a rundown of my impressions after the first 10 hours and roughly go over what the game, in my view, has to offer. So first of all, an introduction. Well, what is Wildstar? What's going on with it? It's set in its own universe, which is heavily inspired by Saturday morning cartoons, and the game tells the story of the discovery of a planet called Nexus, and the struggle between the game's two factions, the Dominion and the Exiles, over the control of this planet, its resources, and its technology. There is a very strong emphasis, at least from the feel that I get of you being a frontier explorer, which is actually quite nice and it definitely permeates much of the game. So just like any other MMO, we start off with the character creation. You get to select between 3 different options depending on how much MMO experience that you have in terms of just how they start the game off for you. So there's a total noob version, which will go through all the ropes, and then there's like an experienced version if you roughly know what's going on. I selected the regular MMO player one, who is new to Wildstar, and it was a pretty decent experience, I suppose. Now after that you select a race, and then one of the game's 6 classes: the warrior, the spell slinger, the esper, the engineer, the stalker, and the medic. I've played lots of the spell slinger and the engineer. The spell slinger is essentially a magically infused cowboy right out of a western movie, and the engineer uses a shotgun, some robot helpers, and can use a variety of mech suits. Mech suits are really cool, both of these feel great, and I'll talk about gameplay a bit later on in the video. The game's races are pretty different, and they offer a nice amount of customization. If you like the cartoon aesthetic, you'll probably really like them. You can also choose a path, either soldier, settler, explorer, or scientist. Each path gets access to unique content in the world, but again, more on that later. Once you get into the game, the first thing that you get hit with is actually, it's kind of pretty and it definitely feels like a modern game. Animations are nice and smooth, and overall, it's a pretty pleasant experience. So that brings us right on to questing. It's a rather strange situation, actually. Doing the quests is really quite fun because of the game's absolutely fantastic gameplay. The actual story itself is really cool as well. It's dealing with the origins of the races that are involved, progenitor species, and in general just some pretty cool light science fiction stuff. Where it falls flat is its quest delivery. Their whole setup is based on various text boxes which contain dialogue, and it's a bit of a bloody mess, to be completely honest with you. The actual UI is definitely designed to allow you to very easily click on an NPC and then immediately click again to accept the quest and go on your merry way. It's as if they're trying to tell a story but also trying to not get you to care about the text dialogue. Also, little of it is voice acted, and overall it's just a bit of a muddled mess. If you're prepared to get invested, then I think there is good value there, but otherwise I suspect a lot of people will just click through quests and pay little attention to what's actually going on. They added a single-player scenario called Alpha Sanctum, which is supposed to serve as a prologue to the game's main world story. That happens at about level 15. I held out hope for it, and while it's got a decently fun boss at the end, honestly, it wasn't that great. People keep telling me the narrative gets better, but from my perspective, they would have to completely change their quest delivery to make that happen within the open world. However, from what I hear, the narrative stuff in the dungeons and the raids is actually quite strong, and the world is littered with these little data lore cubes which give you really nice bits of background. Earlier I mentioned the 4 paths as well. So at launch I played a soldier, and for this free-to-play relaunch I went with Explorer. So when I run around the world as an explorer, there are loads of different markers in the world, for an example like vistas, places I can, well, explore, visit, see, and do things like that. As a soldier, I would maybe get little objectives that were a King of the Hill defense, where I'd run to the objective and then I'd be attacked by waves of enemies. These add a nice bit of variety to the world, and they're also slightly tied into character progression. From what I can tell, they earn you sort of vanity and utility items based on your path, so maybe you'd get some soldiery looking gear and things like that if you choose soldier. Now, the zones themselves are also littered with challenges. Basically, you go into an area and a little pop-up appears which asks you to do a simple task in that area, and they usually share some sort of progression with the quests that you're doing. For an example, it would give you a 5-minute timer and say, hey, go kill a certain amount of this mob. Or go kill as many as you can within this time limit, and depending on how many you kill, you get a bronze, a silver, or a gold medal, and then a bunch of XP and some challenge points at the end, which I think you can use to buy like cosmetic stuff, whatever. It's a pretty cool system. Both of these features are actually great for the zone variety, and really are quite good. Anyway, let's step back a bit and just talk about the overall leveling process. So it's essentially just your regular affair going from zone to zone. So far, I've been able to do mostly the kind of main quest and the few surrounding side quests with that, and basically I've been able to keep pace with the content in terms of my character's level. As I said though, like the questing itself, it's good because of the gameplay. The gameplay is really fun, but the actual storytelling and all that is a muddled mess that's really not that good. Overall, I'd say it's a satisfying experience because the gameplay is great, and you get into this groove of just running around the place tearing shit up that definitely is, to a degree, satisfying. So then, gameplay. I've been teasing this enough. What's the gameplay like? Well, Wildstar's ace in the hole is that it's not a tab target based game. It's got a combat system that's based off telegraphs and aiming. Certainly players of Smite will be pretty used to this idea. Wildstar also limits you to 8 active abilities. Now that makes it feel far less like an MMO and far more like a proper action game, which is really great. I used to play quite a bit of Smite, as I've sort of alluded to, and there are definitely similarities, and I very much appreciate those. Many of your abilities are skill shots, which I think is very good. As an example, my engineer's basic shotgun is a 2-second cast, so during that 2-second cast, I see a telegraph of where it will hit, and then the shot will go off, and anything inside that telegraph will get hit. Now, various different spells have different attack patterns and different interactions, which is really nice. And obviously, like with World of Warcraft, there are, of course, behind-the-scenes interactions like buffs, cooldowns, debuffs, and various different things like that. Now, this overall system with the telegraphs is fantastic for spell and class diversity. It's given Carbine room to really make each spell feel different. They've got different cast times, they've got different attack patterns and different characteristics. It means that it feels really nice. Now, despite both my classes actually being ranged gun users, I found playing my engineer and my gunslinger to feel very different. So this definitely feels like I'm playing an action game that isn't held back by the regular MMO restrictions, whereas World of Warcraft and SWTOR, honestly, they feel like data entry in comparison. Sure, they can be intellectually satisfying, but Wildstar trumps them both handily in terms of action, pace, and thrill. Enemy design also benefits from this system. Your opponents will telegraph attacks at you, and of course that means you have to dodge around the place. Because of the telegraph system, they can make really complex enemy attack patterns, which are just really gratifying to overcome. It's a really, really brilliant system, and really these fights, they feel more like, well, actual fights, like you're grappling with your opponent and really attacking them and trying to dodge their stuff, rather than just attacking a block of meat with a different model. Telegraphs also play into the group play of the game as well. So for an example, if you have a healer in your group, well, many of the area of effect, many of the heals are AoE, and they're also based in telegraphs, so there's an extra layer of movement to the gameplay, and if you're a healer, you're going to need to, point at people and intelligently place your heals. I know that already happens in World of Warcraft, but it's even more so in Wildstar. Overall, I love its combat, and it's easily the game's biggest hook for me. So then, group content. Well, the first bit of group content that I did was an expedition. It was a 3-player role-agnostic instance, which was akin to a scenario in WoW. It lasted 30 minutes, and it ended up being really tedious. It was just a trundle through asinine trash mobs. Not that fun, not that exciting, way too padded out. The next thing I did, though, was I queued up for a dungeon, and this is where Wildstar's mechanics truly shine, with bosses that are just very reactive and very fun. So I did the game's very first dungeon, and already there were more mechanics, especially mechanics that actually matter, than most of World of Warcraft's dungeons, even at much higher levels. For example, there was an instant kill mechanic for not moving into a safe area. There were loads of area effect things that had to be avoided, loads of environmental hazards. There were channeled, interruptible boss mechanics that had to be interrupted, or else everyone would die. It felt like I was really, truly playing a game, where what I did mattered, far more so than doing a leveling dungeon in WoW. Even though this was the game's very first dungeon, it was just far more interesting than the leveling dungeons I've done in Warcraft or Star Wars The Old Republic, and I'm very sure that it's this group content that is where Wildstar shines. Certainly, if I were to take the word of my raid leader, who I absolutely trust when it comes to games, on the higher end content of Wildstar, that it once again just really benefits from extremely good mechanics in terms of its dungeon content. Next, aesthetics. So, it pulls off this whole Saturday morning cartoon look very well. Graphically, it's great, and especially, too, with the updates that the free-to-play patch brought, there's a nice little sort of graphical bump to the game, which is really nice. The world itself is often quite impressive, and it's got some really solid music, and there's loads of touches which are really nice, especially when you level up, you get this really cool, like, announcement thing, which is just brilliant. Aesthetically, I think this game is very strong.
Time to crack some skulls.
It's just such a pity that the storytelling isn't up to snuff in terms of the quest content. Now, in terms of character progression, it's done via unlocking abilities and unlocking amps. Amps are similar to your traditional MMO talents, you just put points into various trees, it's a decent enough system. It seems to support hybrid builds, but I've got no real idea how viable they may be. Now, your spells are in 3 different categories: Assault, Support, and Utility. For an example, in my Engineer, the support talents were for tanking, the assault ones were DPS, and the utility ones were things like buffs, stamina, and stuns and interrupts. You can also upgrade your abilities as you level, and as their rank increases, they gain both incremental upgrades, and they also get more powerful, sort of impactful mechanical changes, which sort of just change how they operate a little bit. Definitely very good. As I said, it operates on a pick 8 system, so many different builds are possible, and it seems like you definitely do have to make choices when you're working out your build. Again though, I've got no idea about the balance situation. I think it's a very cool system, and keeping it down to 8 active abilities means that the game is very intense, movement and sort of action-oriented combat feels very manageable, which is totally good. Next, the free-to-play model. It is, from what I can tell, the best out there. Simply put, it seems brilliant. It relies on some boosts and cosmetic rewards. Now, those cosmetic rewards all seem reasonable, same goes for the boosts. You also can get these things called Omni Bits, which are a premium currency as a random drop from just killing stuff and doing things. This actually means that as a completely free player, you can get store items via playing, though it will take you a bit of grinding to actually get that. Overall, though, the model seems very fair, and certainly it leaves a very good taste in my mouth in comparison to what I saw with Star Wars The Old Republic, which did not have a nice free-to-play model. Basically, if you're playing Tor, just subscribe. Just subscribe and be done with it. It's not worth it in free-to-play. Anyway, Wildstar doesn't pull bullshit like, say, locking down your action bars or maybe even sprinting behind a paywall. It's really, really good in that regard. So, honestly, to give my conclusion, it's a little bit annoying. The combat is brilliant, easily a cut above the rest. The storytelling is piss-poor when it comes to the actual just leveling up and doing your regular world content. It's worse than WoW's, and absurdly woeful in comparison to the Old Republic's. Sometimes when you're running around the zones, things feel a little bit muddled, and maybe they could have directed some of that flow better, but once you actually get into the groove of it, the gameplay's solid, and you can have a good bit of fun just leveling up. Still though, overall, I think this game's a lot of fun, especially with the group content. If you've got a few friends, then you're probably going to find a lot of value in this game's dungeons and perhaps even its raids if you make it that far. Seriously, that content, from what I can tell, is brilliant. Certainly from doing that one dungeon and what I've heard from other people, including people who I definitely trust, the group content of this game is brilliant. So, overall, it's got a very fair free-to-play model. There is pretty much nothing for you to lose other than a bit of time for giving it a go, so I heartily recommend that you give Wildstar a try. It's probably going to be a barrel of laughs. And that's pretty much it for the video. If you want to discuss further or maybe share your experiences with me, then hit me up on Twitter. That's by far the best place to get me. Other than that, though, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.